Why did I go through all that with you? What's the point? What's the point of this? Well, let's use a mic so that we actually can hear your comments if you're going to make them. So,
So making God more solid.
more solid, yeah, more real
Yeah.
to you. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Come forward a bit. Yep.
To help when we have no faith or belief in God, to get started.
Exactly. So we're talking about the issue of faith now. So this is what I want to talk about with you now. The issue of faith. For the majority of people, faith is the main problem they face with their relationship with God. And an intellectual belief in God doesn't overcome an emotional lack of faith. Faith is a soul quality. It's not an intellectual one. So what I notice is that many of you feel or think you have a belief in God, but many of you don't actually feel your belief in God on a moment by moment basis. Does that make sense to you? And the problem with not feeling the connection, in other words, the problem with not having a feeling of faith, is that it's faith that drives prayer. And it's faith that drives your desire to make God your first passion in life. So without faith, it's impossible to actually have that connection with God. So many people who hear divine truth, and this is likely for many of you too, when you hear it, you have some level, don't you, of connection to the logic of it. Is that what you find? The connection to the sort of feelings of logic associated with sort of universal truth. But the logic is not going to drive your faith. To have faith, you've got to have a feeling for God rather than just a knowledge of God. And one of the reasons why we've gone through this is to try to give you a bit of a concept of the nature or the personality of God. And it's only by actually starting to see God as a individual, like a soul that you can connect to, that you can even start to really have a relationship with God. And unless you make God first in your priority system, even having some knowledge of God or even some feelings with God generally won't change your life very much unless it becomes the number one priority in your life. So if we can just maybe look at your priorities at the moment, the things you believe are important. And here it requires a lot of honesty with self as to how to know what is important to you. The primary way of measuring what is important to you is by measuring how long or how much time you spend at it. So what I would like you to do is to ask yourself, where do you spend your time? So if we're honest with ourselves, how is our time mostly utilised? You want to help me out with that? How do you find your time being utilised? So if you look over the course of a day, in a day you've got 24 hours, but shall we say the average person sleeps hopefully around 8 hours, shall we say? So there's 8 hours gone. 8 hours is sleep. Sleep's a very important time for you because you're learning the spirit world when you're asleep. So you're already, you've got 8 hours where you're learning to interact in a different environment, right? So that's good for you. Of course, if you get less sleep, then obviously you get less education in your sleep as well. So obviously getting a good amount of sleep is important for your day-to-day life. But with 8 hours, we've now got 16 hours. So how do you spend it?
Listening to divine truth.
Now let's go up the back, listening to divine truth.
In addiction and in fear.
Okay, so for many of us, we live in a state of addiction, don't we? So let's look at our addictions. Now, we might just, before we look at our addictions, let's take away a few things that we do. Like, you have to wash yourself in the course of a day, probably. So that's what? It depends how dirty you are. But maybe 15 minutes, shall we say? And then you've got to feed yourself in the course of a day. Should we say that's like, well, it depends how fussy with your food you are, I suppose, isn't it? But let's say that's 15 minutes each time, shall we? And if you really like draw it out, might be 20, 25 minutes. But let's say all eating per day, 1 hour.
In Europe, it's more.
In Europe. Is that from experience, Pierre?
How much time should we allow for you?
It depends. If you go to France, it's probably 2 hours or 3 hours.
Oh, but
it's
that's
very important.
socialising. That's different than eating,
okay.
isn't it?
Just pure eating.
Pure eating is just like tom tom tom. Done, isn't it? It's the talking in between that takes the time. Yeah, but it's still probably only an hour for just eating, right? Then you've got to sit on the toilet occasionally. Yeah, hopefully once a day at least. Yeah. So should we give that a long time? 15 minutes. So that gets rid of the refuse that your body's producing. Yeah. So what are we up to now? What else do you need to do? Work. Well, let's look at work. How much do you need it versus how much you do it? It's a good question, isn't it? But let's say the average person spends, what would you spend here? Like in Australia, it'd be like 8 hours. Would it be about that here? Yep, okay. 8 hours working, so that's work. Okay. But it's not every day, is it? Hopefully not. Yeah. Okay. What else? Running the children around from sport to what? That's gonna, for the average person, that takes quite a long time. But we got to question whether it's necessary. But let's look at that. There's in amongst there 9.5 hours. That also doesn't that tell us a lot about how we feel about economy, about money, and our worry about our welfare. The fact that we already spend half of our waking time worrying about the money side of things is interesting in itself, isn't it? But 9.5 hours, what does that give us? Spare time? 6.5 hours? So let's just look at those 6.5 hours. How do you spend them? Shopping. What else?
Knitting.
Watching telly, sports, driving around the countryside, having a look, trying to keep you busy, going to the coffee shop, walking dog. When you start looking at the time, what would our use of time indicate about how important we see our relationship with God? can you see already there's indications, isn't there, that what we believe is sincerity is frequently not as sincere as we believe it to be. Because there are things that we could do to change our life to actually have more time with God, more time to develop that relationship with God. The relationship with God requires us not only thinking about and feeling about God's nature, but it also requires about feeling about and thinking about and developing our human soul as well. And it's really quite sad in a way that we've only left 6.5 hours to do that in the course of a day when it's the most important thing we could do with our life. Now, we do need to take responsibility for our own financial welfare. We do. But how much of that do we need to do? That's a good question, isn't it? For many of us, we need to have a stockpile in the bank or a stockpile of resources available to us before we even start to feel a little bit safe financially, right? And that indicates actually that we have a large amount of fear about money, worry about our day-to-day living expenses in life. So what happens is our feeling and thinking time and our desire to connect to this God sort of becomes not as real to us anymore. We don't treat it as a real thing, something that we need to be doing on a daily basis in terms of establishing that relationship. So to have a relationship with God, the way I sort of see it is it's not a, time off thing. It's a constant thing. There's every single moment of the day you can involve and feel and have feelings for God. You can. Majority of us don't. And that's why we often don't have a very strong connection to God or a very strong connection to God's laws or principles or morals, is because we're not often thinking about God at all. So to have this relationship with God, it's going to require some emotional sincerity on our behalf. And if we have no faith that God is these things, can you see it's going to be very hard to develop that sincerity, isn't it? It's going to be very difficult. We're going to sort of feel like, I hope God exists. This is how many people on earth sort of are. They hope God exists, but they don't feel that God really does exist in their day-to-day life. And frequently there's very confusing things happening in their day-to-day life that they can't understand, and they attribute mistakenly to God or mistakenly to other things, and they have no idea how to resolve those things because the relationship with God isn't developed, and therefore, you can't get told how or what is going wrong with your life. In order for God to communicate with you, it's going to require a level of desire on your part. And when I say a level of desire, it has to be sincere. And what I see in the Western world in particular, but now it's pretty much the whole earth now, addictions is what everybody's sincere about. Meeting their demands and addictions is the thing that they concern themselves or worry about the most. And so God really takes, if any place at all, definitely a second place, but usually way down the list. Normally what happens is the average person firstly thinks and feels about their own welfare. In other words, we are quite self-absorbed and selfish, right? Then we think about our family welfare. In other words, the people we believe are our family. So that usually means blood relatives or married or children, rather than seeing the whole world of humanity as our family. So we think about our immediate family welfare. And then it's very rare when you think about it. Usually we throw in some entertainment. Into there. And by the time you've done these things, can you see God is like an afterthought oftentimes?
Well, God's usually the person we turn to when our addictions with our
When
own-
these are going wrong.
Yes.
In other words, he's our disaster relief. You know? Yeah. So we sort of see God as our rescuer rather than our friend that we have constant communication with. Yeah. And of course, the more we don't consider or contemplate the nature of God, and the more we feel a lack of faith in God, the less God gets considered. So can you see, without us developing some faith in God, it's going to be very, very hard, isn't it, to put forward any real motivation or effort into having a relationship with God. Yeah. And the usage of our time indicates this to us. If we are constantly involved in just day-to-day life and day-to-day activities, and we very rarely contemplate or even pray to God for anything, can you see, you could basically say that our feelings for God are very insincere, if that is the case. And if communication with God requires sincerity, and I am not as sincere as I would like to believe I am, can you see I'm going to have problems receiving love and giving love to God? There's not going to be a very close relationship. Yeah? Isn't it very interesting how very quickly you get down? Like, all I had to do is talk about the amount of hours a day, and all of a sudden, many of you have automatically just closed down emotionally to the subject. So that's really interesting, isn't it? Can you see, while we're talking about something external to us, we're pretty open, and we can even contemplate like things like God or existence or other spiritual concepts. But as soon as it's brought back to where do I stand with this, immediately a big shutdown comes over you emotionally. And of course, all that does is encourage a lot of spirits who are also shut down to come over you as well. And before you know it, the whole atmosphere in the room just goes from being quite, just before we left for lunch, quite buoyant. Yeah. And then I raise this issue and boom, the atmosphere is all of a sudden quite low. Yeah. We just have mics. Thank you. Now tomorrow we'll have to have different mic runners, won't we?
We will, to give these guys
Just
a break.
to give these guys a break.
For myself, I noticed that there was a lot of guilt, shame, some of those
Yep.
emotions.
Yep.
And I had to shut it down for myself, because otherwise I would be crying and I would be disturbing the room and talk. And
Yep.
so I guess that's what happened
Yeah. No, you're spot on.
for myself.
For many, that's what happens.
Yeah.
Yep. For others, though, it's more angry. Like, why are you pointing out flaws in me for? Type of anger.
Should be inspiring
It should
me,
be
Jesus.
inspiring me, not pulling me
I
down.
need to recognize that.
Yeah.
Someone else.
Yeah. So you recognise that feeling too?
No,
And I
she
think
said she didn't
you didn't recognise that feeling? No. No, but it is there actually. Yeah. So, and it's very common, because the reason why it happens is because when we start having to contemplate our own issues, we are often much more resistive than contemplating God's issues. So we would like to believe that the fact that we don't communicate very much with God is God's fault. Right? Most of us would like to believe that. And the reason why we'd like to believe that is because we forget that God is all these things in preference to avoiding the emotions that we feel when somebody raises, well, this is why this relationship thing isn't happening.
Can I also add, Dylan, that when when you point out how our time is being used, and many people recognise, oh yeah, he's right, yeah, I do have all these addictions, and I'm avoiding like God in my day-to-day life. Oftentimes that is a real downer because it really highlights the difference between this reality and the reality that I live in. So the lack of faith, that really it highlights immediately the lack of faith I feel in all the lovely things we talked about before lunch, doesn't it? And so and then often in my experience we go to guilt and shame to avoid that. You know, we get down on myself rather than just feel the terrible feeling that I don't even know if everything he's saying is true, and I don't want to risk experimenting with that, because a lot of times this drives these things, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's also obviously other emotions too. Like obviously all of these emotions are covering emotions. They are not actual causal, what I would call emotions that cause a problem. They're emotions that are the effect of the problem. So often underneath those are more emotions that cause the problem, like sadness.
This lack of faith we have.
Lack of faith.
Yeah.
See, most of our problems we don't realise are actually more spiritual than we think they are. When I say spiritual, what I mean is they're soul-based qualities that we haven't developed. And so the on-flow effect of a soul-based quality we haven't developed is physical symptoms. So an example of that is a lack of faith is a soul quality. A lack of faith creates physical symptoms in our life. One of those physical symptoms is the way we use our time. You could say as a physical symptom of, or you could say proof of, the lack of faith in God. Because if you have a strong faith in God, you don't waste time doing unnecessary things in your life. You realise that every pursuit you have is driven by the love and desire you have to live in harmony with God's principles and laws. So you don't get, you could say, drawn away into side things that have no bearing on those matters in your life. You have a passion towards the one thing. So what happens is we often are in this state where we think we do, but we don't really believe these things. And inside of us instead, there's all these imbibed societal and family-based constructs about God that when we think of God, we have sort of oftentimes the opposite feeling. So instead of thinking God, for instance, is loving, we think God's punishing. And the majority of you have been brought up in a society that believes in a punishing God, right? We don't believe God is wise. In fact, the majority of you have been brought up in a society that believes God's stupid. Like that God does a whole heap of things that are unknowable and illogical and mysterious, right? This is what we're brought up to believe. We don't believe that God is consistent, and in particular, we don't believe his laws are consistent. So we think we can break them and be immune from the consequence, right? Because we don't believe in a predictable God with predictable laws. And as a result of these things, we start to have a lack of faith in God, and that lack of faith is then demonstrated in the way in which we use our time. So now we start using our time in a manner that basically, fundamentally on earth in particular, ignores the existence of God. In our day-to-day life, We're doing a whole heap of things, and God's sort of like an afterthought. Now, if God's okay with being your afterthought, so you don't have to feel bad if God is your afterthought, God's okay with that. He's not offended by God by being your afterthought. He's not offended by you only spending an hour with him a day. He's not like a demanding friend who goes, you only spent 1 hour with me today, I am not spending any time with you tomorrow because of that. He's not like that at all. He is happy to spend time with you when you're happy to spend time with him. He's not going to be punishing. He's not going to be punitive. He's not going to try to make your life hard, as many people do believe, if you don't spend enough time with him. Near where we're staying at Evo's house, which is in Brussels, there's these churches, right? And every hour they ring their bells. I don't know, that must be driving you guys nuts if you're living there, because it's like there's no peace. There's no a peaceful time with God. Another bell goes off. It's just like bang. And they on Sunday, it's like 10 times worse. It's like ringing the bell there's a 6 o'clock mass and an 8 o'clock mass and a midday mass, and it's just a bang, 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 and it's all over the countryside. They're trying to force their religion on the whole countryside. You understand? It's a purposeful action taken completely out of harmony with God's principles to try to get people to go and worship God, ironically. Right? And there's a misunderstanding of God's nature in that. That's quite obvious. And here we are, you've been brought up in this environment, historically in Europe, the Christian environment is very powerful, still got very powerful influences in all sorts of areas of life in Europe. And it's influenced how you feel about God and the lack of faith you have about God as a feeling, even if you think it hasn't. And the proof that it has is how you use your time. Because if you really believe God was your friend, a constant companion, who you could speak to about any subject, who will give you love and you can love him or her, and you can feel God at any time and get answers from God, do you think that you'd be doing it 1 hour a day if you really felt it? Can you see? You wouldn't be, would you? You'd be doing it hours a day. In fact, like you'd be working away and praying at the same time. You'd be doing things physically, family, whatever, playing games, but you're praying at the same time, because you can do both at the same time. You can have feelings, which are prayers, at the same time as you do things, can't you? While I'm talking to you, I'm praying at the same time. Right? I want to pray at the same time because God can tell me what it is you need to talk about, what it is we need to talk about. So we can do all of these things at the same time, but only if you believe with your heart that God's listening, that God wants to have this relationship with you constantly. Yeah? And if we don't feel that, then of course how we use our time will be very intermittent. Our relationship with God would be hit and miss. It will be occasional. It will be, I feel under stress now. Now I've got to talk to God. Or I feel like, I just had a relationship breakup. I now need to talk to God. But all the time you had the relationship, you never talked to God at all, which is really the time you needed to talk to God to sort out issues in the relationship, right? So the way we think frequently is that God's there for the hard times. Yeah? And not for every time. Yep. So microphone down here, sorry, Eva.
Sorry, can I ask about faith? I've been.
Let's go to down here first. Yep. And then we'll go back.
I think for me, my question is, the minute you spoke about...
Is that gone on there? No, you're right.
Just look on the bottom, Gomo. Is it muted? Just is a red light on, or a green light, or a yellow light?
If you just bring it to me. Yeah.
Green and red. Yeah, that's what we need. Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
Okay.
Just bring it a
Just
bit
bring it up,
closer.
please.
All right. So for me, I think the feeling that
It's not
comes
coming
up.
through, is it?
No.
No. It's not coming through. Okay. Can we try the other mic? Thanks. And if you can bring that mic down to me. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So for me, what I was gonna ask is, or maybe should I try speak louder?
No.
It's not coming through at all, is it?
Is it coming through?
Okay.
Okay. Let me try again.
Yep. Go.
So for me, the feeling that came up when you were showing how our time is distributed, and how we want to have this desire to, or we want to show that we have a sincere desire to connect with God, is that it almost feels like when you're in let's say in a corporate job, that there's this feeling of, okay, that you need to, I don't know, quit your job and, I don't know, live in a monastery and
Yeah.
kind of leave the
Leading
fleshy
in
life.
practical life.
Yes, like you need to like leave the fleshy life behind, and I don't know, like go and walk around in robes and go
Yeah.
look after orphans all day type of thing.
Yep.
And I think for me, I feel like what I would love to hear more of, like how do you integrate it in your daily life? Because
Yeah.
it feels like it's not such a drastic thing that you have to completely abandon life as you know it today,
Definitely not.
but instead to find ways to actually integrate it in just having those moments of intentions or feelings,
Yep.
to connect. So for me, I think that's the bit that I would love for you to expand more on, because I think there's a lot of, I think, perception from childhood religion or upbringing,
Yes.
that feelings of like, okay, whatever you have now, like abandon it for you to, because historically
Go and live in a monastery.
yes, because historically the way to demonstrate physically that you have this connection is that your surroundings are completely different
Yeah.
compared to where we're living now.
And,
That's right.
And
So-
the way you dress and
The
the
way
way
you
you
dress,
speak and
yes,
all these
yes.
kind of
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's one of the problems people have with Jesus and I, because we're so down to earth.
Yes, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, should I move to Australia? Like, what does this mean? You know. So I think for me, I would love to know, like, how does this meet me where I am today to improve, like, my current life in.
this is another thing I wanted to talk about tomorrow, but let's
Yeah.
get a bit of a start on it, shall we? See, today I wanted to help you come to terms with the fact that most of us don't have a very strong connection with God, and our time, the way we use our time, demonstrates that. But partly it's because we have these kind of concepts, which we think that, having a connection with God means I abandon my entire life. There was one man in Australia who came to me and said, I've decided to have a connection with God. I'm going to leave my family, leave my children. I'm just going to live alone for a few years. And I said, why are you doing that for? That's the very opposite thing God would want you to do, And he's going, well, I just feel that that way I'll have a stronger connection with God. And I said, no, you have a terrible connection with God if you do things like that, because you're abandoning moral principles.
Yeah, because I think for me, what's funny is that as you say that now, like when I think about the amount of time my kids take, and I'm like, okay, if they were not there, I mean, I love them, but if they were not there, my thinking is, would I have more time for God? And maybe not, right? But I think those are some of the things that, like, as you talk about the time distribution, you think it's easy to think, okay, eliminate that and that. But if the sincere desire is not there, even if those things are removed, you
Correct.
still don't actually follow
And
You're not going to adjust this by just saying, I'm now spending 1 hour a day praying, so I'm going to spend 2. And
And-
everything will be sorted.
And also, your relationship with your children is an incredible way to,
Sort out your issues with God.
they're
Yeah.
going to be reflected in your relationship with your
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're now talking about the question that one of you asked right from the beginning, which is the practical application of God's truth in your day-to-day life, isn't it? That's really what we're asking the question about. What is that practical application?
Eva, I think.
So is that mic now working?
I think it is.
Yeah. Can you just?
Can I just test?
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah,
I
it
can
sounds
see
like
it.
this,
So.
Yep. But what I'm saying to you first, and this is something that I do wish for everybody to get properly, you're not going to be motivated to change the day-to-day life unless you realize how important this relationship with God is. And how you can integrate, if it is important, you will find every single moment of your life is a way of integrating it into your life. Every single thing you do will be governed by the principles that are dictated by your relationship, the loving relationship you have with God. So, an example of that. Your child comes home from school and says, "Oh, someone's bullying me." So we got the problem, my child is being bullied. All right. How do I integrate my relationship with God with this problem? Can you see, I can approach this problem from a purely emotional response. My child getting hurt, I've got to do something about it. I've got to go to school and we've got to find that bully and we've got to, get him out of the school or punish him, or, he should be banned from school and my child's not safe. And, and I could really get tied up, couldn't I, in all of my, you could say, addictive emotional responses to the problem, which is what the average parent does in that situation. Yeah, either that or they completely ignore it. One of the two. But if I have a relationship with God, what would I do? It's a good question, isn't it? So, at the back there.
An answer.
You're going to answer? Yeah, that's all good.
Actually, out of my heart, I would ask, how are you feeling about that? That would be the first thing.
Now, I'm not hearing you guys very well, so I might just... It's just because of the aircon's going on and my ears are also blocked.
I'm kind of Jesus translator because his ears are blocked.
My ears are blocked as well. So.
Yeah.
If my child would come and would be bullied, I would ask, how are you feeling about that?
How you would feel about that?
Yeah, I would not think about the other one. I would think about how are you, my child, feel about that?
Yep.
Like,
does that help your child?
Yeah. What?
Well, your child's being bullied, which is violent. There's a violent thing happening towards your child. Just feeling about it is not going to be a suitable response, is it?
First thing I would do.
Well, it's one thing you might need to do, but it's not the only thing, is what I'm saying. Is it? Yep. Someone's being violent to another person. Doesn't even matter if it's your child. What if it's your child being violent to the others? Like, either way, there's a problem that needs to be sorted. And taking no action but just feeling is not the solution. Right? Feeling is part of the solution because you need to feel in order to know what actions to take, but just feeling is not the appropriate response. Any other ideas? At the back, thank you.
I would try to feel, precising, I would try to feel what's the causal emotion within me that this happens to the child, to my child.
Okay, so you want to find, your goal is to find the cause, but what if your child is not the cause?
He's saying the cause within himself as the parent.
No, I know that.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah.
But what if it has nothing to do with your child? It's got just everything to do with the fact there's a bully at school. Like somebody else's child. It's got mostly to do with, isn't it? Like, if there's a bully, do you think the problem is mostly your problem or the child's problem? Or is it mostly the bully's problem? What's God's view? Is a person who wants to commit violence in a worse state or a better state than the person who receives the violence? Isn't the person who commits the violent act in a worse state? Isn't that true? So mostly it's the bully's problem, isn't it? Or you could say the bully's family or the surroundings, the environment of the bully, it's mostly their problem. So if I'm firstly looking at things and feeling things from God's perspective and connecting to God, I'm going, firstly, what's right and wrong here? So the very first thing I would do with any situation is look at the truth of the situation. Is it my fault he's getting bullied? Bullying is a violent act. Does my child bully others? If the answer to that is no, then is it my child's fault that he's getting bullied? The answer is no. Now, he may have emotions that attract bullying. That is true, isn't it? He may have emotions that attract it, but is it his fault that the bully targets him? No. It's not their fault, because the bully is being sensitive to who he can bully, and he's going, I can bully Ziggy, so I'm going to bully Ziggy. Now, is it Ziggy's fault if I bully him? No. It's my fault, isn't it? I'm the person being unloving. It's my fault. That's the truth. That's God's truth. Right there. Right? So in the moment, the very first thing you need to determine is, what is the truth from God's perspective about a situation? Now, if I'm going through life and I'm having experience after experience after experience, if I can determine what God's truth is in every experience, can you see that's going to help me greatly, isn't it, to stay connected with God? Yeah? No? Yeah? Okay. So, first step, determine the truth.
So what if you have two people that both feel that they are feeling God's truth, and they have opposing stories?
Firstly, but what if, let's look at what if, firstly. In any situation, there is a lot of what ifs, or but what ifs. The key is, what does God feel about the situation, really? Now, two people frequently will feel like, if you talk to a Christian and he's, say, being very violently outspoken towards, say, a Muslim, the Christian will feel he's right, and the Muslim will feel he's right, and both of them will feel in harmony with God. But what I'm saying is, that's not real, because God is. So as soon as I get two people in disharmony, much more thought has to go into it, doesn't it? Because if two people are claiming they're both right and they're both in harmony with God's laws, then the answer to that is probably both of them are not in harmony with God's laws. Quite plainly, because God's predictable and consistent, the law is predictable and consistent, it means that both people's attitudes needs to be examined. That would be my response to it straight away. Does that make sense? But let's look at the but what if. When we go, but what if this, and but we're not realizing, but most of the time we've got feelings that are going, ooh, I don't know, I like that idea, ooh, and so, but what if it comes up, we're using our mind to pop up ideas, but I've got a thing where that doesn't apply, but if you allow yourself to calm and connect, you can see God is predictable and constant. In the what if you raised, you can answer it yourself, because you go, if two people have got the idea they're connecting God, and yet they've got completely different stories, then either one or both of them is not connecting to God. So now I have to, using my connection with God, determine which
of the two
is correct. I need to take more responsibility with my connection with God to work out who is right and who is wrong, or maybe they're both wrong. I need to make that determination. But you can see, if I understand that God is predictable and constant, that I go, oh, I'm getting different answers here. God's predictable and constant. See, my connection with God is going to help me go, they're not constant. God's constant. Something's wrong here. And even if I don't know what is wrong, I've at least now got a direction to pray in to find out what is wrong, haven't I? Because I can go, well, something's wrong here. So instead of me just accepting it, I can go, I can't accept that. There's got to be something going on. What is it? And I might not know. And if I have a good enough connection with God, God can tell me. But I might need to put in a sincere effort to know. It might take a few hours or days for me to go, but what is it, God? You know, what? There's something wrong here. What do I do about this situation? I'm concerned about it. What action should I take? What feeling should I have? This is what will guide me in the moment to come to some resolution. The majority of us don't do that, though, if we're honest with ourselves. What we do is we go, can't trust that, can't trust that. All I can do is trust myself. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work it, rely on me and do whatever I feel I should do, which could be just as much in error as the bully in the end. And in fact, quite often we can turn into a bully trying to correct the bully, which is often the case, right? Because we're just as now emotionally charged as the bully was about the issue they're facing, right? So when I've got God's character in my feelings, I can then say, okay, God's predictable and constant. I got two answers. Two people are telling me there's a different cause. Something's wrong. I've got to work it out. I've got to be responsible. My relationship with God can help me sort this issue, right? Truth being my first goal, because without truth, no freedom is possible, no love is possible. So truth is my first goal. Now, of course, to accept truth, there's something I need to be before then, isn't it? Like, if I'm arrogant and pig-headed and won't listen to anybody, obviously, it's going to be hard to accept truth from any source. So I need to be open to God in particular. I need to be humble in my position with God. Now, I find that pretty easy because God's infinite. He's better than me at everything. Like, absolutely everything. There's not a single thing that I can do better than God. And in fact, my capacity of doing something even that God does is like an ant connected to the universe. That's how I sort of see myself. So I'm just like this ant, and God's like this all-powerful being. And so for me to have the idea or concept that I'm doing something better than God is just ludicrous, right? So I don't even think that way. I go, no, God's way is the best way. What I have the responsibility to do is find it. That's all I got to do, find it. Now, God wants to tell me what it is, but of course, if I'm not humble and I don't have a seeking feeling towards truth, I'm not going to hear it. I need to learn how to hear it. Now, once I've determined the truth, and we still haven't talked about what is the truth about the bully yet, but once I've determined the truth, and I'm not going to resolve the bully problem for you actually, because you need to sort out what would be done if you're in alignment with God, right? So, but once I've determined what the truth is, and the very fundamental truth is, the bully is wrong. The bully is violent. If we don't start there, then now, a lot of people nowadays have a very permissive attitude about violence. Isn't that true? You see it happening in a family where, a child's being disobedient, a bit of a tap. That's fine. That's violence, but the average person goes, that's fine. All right? Or there's a lot more emotional violence nowadays. That's why you get on social media, not that we have any, but I just hear it from others. And they get on social media and you can get bullied on social media, right? And there's a lot of violence in social media where people are attacking people and pulling them down and rubbishing them. You know, sometimes I get on tech sites to resolve some technical equipment issues, and there's two people having a barney about tech. Like, and I'm talking like F this and F that at you, and you know, like really like angry with each other. And they're meant to be answering tech questions. Like, people get hung up about anything, and it's because there's no connection with the qualities of God in their interaction with each other, no matter how frustrating they might be or frustrated they might be. So, how's the aircon wise? I think we need to keep them on, don't we? So we need to be humble. We need to have a focus or a desire for truth in any circumstance. So any decision you make in the course of a day, what is God's truth about it? So you go and buy a coffee. Seems simple enough. What's God's truth about it? Well, why are you buying the coffee? Probably say you don't want to feel something, or you want to feel... No, what is coffee? It's a stimulant, isn't it? Makes you feel better than you felt before you had it. Why do you need a stimulant? There's got to be a reason. So even in the decision to buy a coffee, it's like, oh, what's God's truth about this? I feel like a coffee. I want to have a coffee. But what's God's truth? God's truth, well, why do you need a stimulant? What in the moment caused you to feel like you need that stimulant right now? You know, if you're practically connected to God, it would be, I want to have a coffee. So you admit the truth to yourself when you're humble enough to admit the truth. I need a coffee. It's like the end of my
life and death.
Life and death almost. And so we need the coffee, and we're honest with ourselves about it. So it's not good to be dishonest. It's not good to say, oh, yes, I could have a coffee or not, you know. I've got power over the coffee urge, whatever it is. And you know, that's not being humble or honest with yourself. And so obviously that's not going to be the answer. But if I'm connected with God, I'm going, okay, I need a stimulant. I need to pick me up. What has caused this? Why do I need this? What's going on? Now, the average person on earth, when we talk about divine truth and I talk about coffee, they think, what? I'm not allowed to drink coffee now? Like, God. It's like, and I'm saying, well, you see, if you can feel God's feelings about you needing a stimulant, then you'd probably see it as a bigger thing than what you think, you see. Because God wants you to be in a place of constant happiness, constant freedom, constant love, constant security with yourself, but also he wants you to be like in a state where when you need a rest, you should be taking one, not taking a stimulant. He wants you to love yourself. He doesn't want you to start popping substances and causing a degradation of your own body's functioning as a result. And it is well known, well enough for us to know that a pregnant woman shouldn't be drinking coffee, right? So it's well enough known that it's not good for you to constantly take stimulants. And yet the average person goes, I need my coffee every day. I need the stimulant. I just need my coffee the moment I get up out of bed. This is why we have whole forests in Amazon and elsewhere getting completely destroyed for the sake of coffee beans. So we're not even seeing that our desire for the substance that picks me up is actually causing the degradation of forests in other places of the world, and also the extinction of animals in those locations, because it's all large-scale farming that's engaged in those locations generally, and we're not seeing how damaged it is. Now, if you just had a little coffee plant in your backyard, it probably wouldn't be that damaging, but it's still a stimulant that's affecting your body, and you've got to start questioning why you need it, right? Now, a person who's connected to God would question, because they're humble enough to question, and they also want the truth. They want to know why it is that I feel the way I feel under certain circumstances. What are the times that I need this stimulant, and why do I need it? What is it giving me, or what is it helping me avoid? The average person would, ignore all that, but the person who's connected to God would want to know, because we're humble. So once we found what the truth is, then I would take a loving action based on that truth. So I'm there with my coffee. I need my coffee. I want my coffee, but I'm not letting myself have it. That's the loving action. Instead, what I'm going to do is feel the reason why I need the stimulant. That would be my loving action, right, in that moment. So I go down the street. I walk into a shop. I need some clothes. Go up to the clothes. There's all these clothes there. Some are cotton, some are wool, some are different substance, some are like completely manufactured out of oil, oil substances, and I've got a choice. But the ones that are more natural, and particularly the ones like wool or cotton, which are more natural, they cost more. What do I do? Right? If I'm connected to God, what would I do? I'd firstly be humble. And I would say, well, the right thing, what is the right thing to do? Something that is more sustainable, something that doesn't create more landfill, something that is decomposable is going to be better for the environment than something that's not, right? Now, a lot of us go, oh, but it's recyclable. But have you seen how much energy goes into recycling something? It's often more than it takes to produce the original thing, right? So a lot of times that's not very practical at all. And if you feel God's feelings about it, God's not hot on recycling, actually, because he doesn't want the things there in the first place. So when we have this illusion of recycling, we're going down the track of going, here's a bad substance, let's recycle it over and over again and make it better by recycling it. But God's saying, why are you using it in the first place? If you're sensitive to God, you would feel that God's saying that. But the average person isn't, so we choose based on convenience, or we choose based on price, not considering the full ramifications of our decision, because we're not connected to God in the moment. We're not asking ourselves, what is love? What would be something being constant, something, being sensitive to what's going on around the world? What would they do? Here in Belgium, one of the things you're famous for is chocolate, right? Is that not true? Yes. Yeah. Belgian chocolate, top of the range. Chocolate. Do you know what goes into making it? Cocoa beans, yeah. Where are they purchased from? Because you can't grow them here. 60% of the world's cocoa beans come from Africa, right? 2 countries in particular, Ghana and I think it's Ivory Coast. Do you know what's happening to those countries? Producing this seemingly essential substance to day-to-day life, chocolate. Almost every one of their national parks is now being used for cocoa production. There's almost no native environment there anymore. The average farmer is paid $1 a day, right, in the whole of those 2 countries. they tried to increase the price to $1.2 a day, and the world's cocoa purchasers they stopped purchasing from those countries. Just so that you can get a chocolate cheap enough in your shop, really, is what it's about. Now, if I would go, can I live on $1 a day? How hard is it to live on $1 a day? Well, do you think they have shoes? No, they don't have shoes. Do you think they have houses? They have shanties. They live in shanties, most of these farmers. Do you think they have enough clothes? They have 2 pairs of clothes at the most for their entire life, right? For most of these farmers. They're supplying the world, 60% of the world's cocoa beans, right? And they live in like what we would classify as abject poverty. Even though chocolate is viewed as a luxury resource, isn't it? A luxury. And yet the very people who are growing it are living in abject misery. Does that sound right to you? All right. It doesn't sound right to me. But the answer isn't to stop eating chocolate necessarily, because then they'd have nothing to grow. They've already killed everything else to grow cocoa. So there has to be some loving actions that we would take that sort that out. So every time you go to buy some chocolate, you would be asking yourself, firstly, how is this addiction of mine affecting the rest of these people around the world? And if I do want to eat chocolate at some point or eat cocoa at some point, what am I going to do to fix this problem that I'm a part of creating? What am I going to do there? There's a responsibility we have to do something about it if we're going to eat chocolate. Does that make sense? Yep. Microphone.
Yeah, in Denmark we have some companies who says they own their own plantation and they pay them well.
Yeah, but does that actually help everybody there?
I don't know if it helps everybody in that little place.
Exactly, like the problem is endemic in the entire industry, and there are small pockets of the industry that are going, let's try to fix that.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you've got to pay more for chocolate, let's say you had to pay 4 times the amount. How many people in the Western world would be pretty upset with that?
Only the good ones.
Only the bad people would be upset. But the reality is most of us are not facing the reality of the problem, right? And I'm just bringing up that as a minor sort of issue. It's just an issue based on what happens in your country.
Yeah, if I can ask a question about that, because I feel like me and my family, we made quite a lot of decisions. You know, stop using makeup, not wash your hair, I don't know, like not drive a car or grow your own vegetables.
Yep.
Stop playing sports but how do you keep balance? How do you two keep balance in making decisions that are...
This idea that we have to stop everything is not wise.
But then you say stop eating chocolate, stop
I'm not saying stop eating chocolate, I'm saying...
So where's the balance? So for example, makeup. I could say like makeup, we could just stop with it, right? Because and earrings, you could stop with that.
Yep.
But then clothes, I mean, like I don't really care about that much about what I'm wearing, but I also can see that some people really enjoy wearing certain clothes.
Well, it's an expression of your personality, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So what's where like how is it?
Almost everything we do in life can have love brought to it. So it's very rare that we need to actually stop something. So an example of this is this.
So wearing makeup can be loving.
Well,
or not. So that's a...
I don't wear makeup. Now, I
No,
feel
me
that
neither.
the
But I
closer
think
you get to
Mary
God,
sometimes
you won't.
does, or wearing earrings. So is it like where I
There's a difference between makeup and earrings, isn't there? Because earrings can be passed on from generation to generation. They can be permanent. They can be made once and worn thousands of times. Makeup is on off, on off, on off, on off, constant consuming. They're two very different substances. And this is where a person who's connected to God would know the difference. So if you're connected to God, you go, okay, these things that require, and why am I putting makeup on?
you need natural equipment to have earrings, right? And you could maybe use. You should not have to harm the nature to put something in your ear. I mean, it's still a very small, of course, harm to nature to wear earrings. I mean, it's smaller than makeup. And
yeah, I'm saying, well, I don't wear earrings either.
oh yeah, me neither.
Notice. And the whole idea of piercing your body is an act of self-hatred, actually. From God's perspective, He made your body perfect. Why would you want to spoil it with some holes? Unnecessary holes, right? In different parts of your body. It's like, why would you want that? You see, a lot of times these things are treated in the world as expressions of personality when actually they're expressions of injury. They're expressions of, I have some feelings or misgivings about myself and I need to look better, so I need to put on makeup, right? Rather than address emotional issues, let's put on makeup instead. Let's wear earrings instead, because if I wear earrings, then I maybe look more attractive, a bit of bling, it looks better. But oftentimes we do these things, like we have to pierce our body to do it. And I don't think any of you ever enjoyed having your ears pierced, probably, would you? Or those of you who had your ears pierced, you wouldn't have enjoyed it at the time, would you? It's one of the most sensitive parts of your body, and yet how many times it's done when a person's even a child. Like they can't even make their decision for themselves. They're forced upon by mum or dad or something to make that decision, and most of the time influenced by society. So there's a big difference between me destroying my body in order to get something done and me doing something that's actually loving, is what I'm pointing out. But frequently, a person who's disconnected from God can't tell the difference, right?
And can I also say we're measuring actions again now
Yep.
rather than motivations, because that's something very different.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Like for example, one of his. So I don't raise my hair anymore.
Yep,
So everything
yep.
just grows. Because it feels good. But then when somebody explains to me, yeah, well, I do that because I feel better because of doing it. Then it's Then sometimes I don't. Yeah, maybe then I don't have a connection. I'm pretty sure I don't have a connection with God. But do you sometimes still doubt, or is it so clear that it's
What happens when you're connected with God? Every single thing has a definite answer. It is confronting when you don't want the answer, but it's also very good because you get an answer on every subject you want. So that's what I love about it. But if you think about it, it's confronting emotionally to be told by somebody, actually, this is an unloving thing. Like me just even saying eating chocolate in the manner that it's currently produced is unloving is confronting enough for many of you. And I haven't even talked about your personal emotions about it yet, right? So it's like, well, if just one little thing like eating chocolate is already confronting, then what is it going to be when you've got to change your whole life? How's that going to be? So the issue is that I'm trying to illustrate by giving you examples, is the issue is every single connection I have with God and all of God's qualities will influence my ability to determine the truth on any subject and therefore act lovingly in every situation. That's the net result. So the net result is if I am connected to God and connected to God's qualities, which is all about, one of the qualities is love. So once I am connected with God and connected to those qualities, there are certain truths that become self-evident in every question. And once those truths are established, now I can act in a loving manner about them. That's what I'm suggesting. It's going to confront me because every addiction that I have, every reason, justification that I have that's unloving is going to get confronted. Every one of them. Relationships, friendships, what I eat, what I drink, what I wear, makeup, earrings, hairstyle, everything is going to get confronted one way or the other. And some of the things will feel quite minor and yet be quite major, like having a coffee in the morning. The average person who is regularly having coffee, giving it up is pretty tough, right? Can be quite major. You know, a person who's smoking, very damaging to your body, smoking, but the average person having to give it up finds it pretty hard, right? Because there's a lot of emotional reasons why we do it. And that all will need to be addressed. But if I have a relationship with God, it's going to affect my life in every practical way I could imagine. Right? And this is what the average person on earth doesn't want. Because we want self-determination. We want the right to make our own choices and decisions. We want to keep drinking our coffee if that's what I want. And I want to, if I want to put on makeup, I'm putting on damn makeup and I'm not listening to, about anything else about it. And if it, you know, that's how we feel, isn't it? Like, how dare they tell me how to live my life? And God's not telling you how to live your life. He's suggesting what's loving is what he's doing. And he wants to do that because it's going to make you happier. Right? Every time you look in the mirror and put on some makeup, do you think you're happy? Because you're looking in the mirror and you're putting on makeup, you're trying to cover over the things you're unhappy about. Isn't that like you're unhappy about how you look, so you got to adjust it, right? Isn't that true? So are you happy with yourself? Now, I look in the mirror, I'm 61. I look in the mirror, I see spots happen here and there. You know, I've been out in the sun most of my life, and so get all these sunspots and everything, and my skin's going wrinkly. First time in my life, like, like, you know, do you think I like it? Yes. Well, how do you feel growing old? No, it's like you go, I wish I was 30 again, right? I wish I was 30 again, but with all this wisdom that I have. Not that many people, even in their 60s, are very wise, but, you know, that's the general way we think, right? So we are, if we come to love ourselves, there's a lot of things that we choose to do in our life that we would not do. Yeah? And God's trying to teach us how to love ourselves. And in fact, you can't become at one with God without loving yourself. Because God loves you at the moment more than you love yourselves. Proof of that is you're not at one with God yet. If you're at one with God, you will finish up loving yourself as much as God loves you. Right? And that's a lot. You will feel that if you go through the process. You'll feel how much God loves you. And then you go, whoa, every time I act out of harmony with love of self, it's just offensive. I'm offending myself by acting out of harmony with love of self. So this is the thing, when I'm connected with God, it's going to affect my life in practical manners with regard to the truth, right? It's going to be, the truth is going to be exposed to me. And once it's exposed to me, it'll be so obvious to me that I've now got a decision to make. I've got, am I going to do the loving thing? Or am I going to ignore the loving thing? That'll be the question that I have to resolve. For many of us, what we do in our day-to-day lives, we don't want to know the truth. Because if we know the truth, it then brings this question into action, doesn't it? See, our general course of action is, let's not know the truth, because if I know the truth, then I'll have to make a decision. I'll have to do something different. So somebody asked me about, wearing earrings or makeup. What is God's truth about it? Once I know the truth, every time I go to put on the makeup, I'm patching up all the things I don't like. Can you see? Knowing the truth means that I'm now, every time I do it, it's now exposed to me, that truth. Does that make sense to you? So now that I've mentioned about coffee, every time you go and get a damn coffee, it's going to be, like, what am I doing? The truth of it, it's going to, it's like, I want my coffee, but I can't enjoy it anymore. Like, do you know what I mean? So, and this is the trouble with the truth, is it exposes things that you need to make decisions about. And the problem with exposing anything that you need to make a decision about is if you don't make a loving decision, you will feel the guilt of it every time. Every time. If you make the loving decision, you'll have no guilt at all. Yeah, which is the joy of making a loving decision, right? Yep. Just microphone if you...
When I hear this, I feel like a wave of all the things that are sinful, like the things I eat,
Yep.
the things I buy for my children, like
Yep.
plastic.
Yeah.
And it is at so many parts of my life, so many things,
Yep.
that I feel I freeze inside.
Yep.
And I end up feeling guilty, but not doing anything.
Yes.
And I wonder, where is love for myself and maybe taking small steps? I was wondering if you can maybe talk a little bit about that. About
Firstly,
this.
every step you take in harmony with love, God feels is a big step, not a small one. Yeah, understand? Like, if you think about what God prioritizes, He prioritizes love first, truth first, love first. So any time you make a decision in harmony with love, God's going, fantastic. And you'll feel it like, oh. And also you will go, you will be happy and proud of yourself making that loving choice, right? Every time it happens. Now, the trouble with our lives is we have so many things where you, as you rightly pointed out, that are sins. Now, let's define sin, shall we? Sin is the not hitting the mark of love. So it comes from a word, and I used the word sin in the first century because, and the way I explained it was, imagine you got a target and you were shooting an arrow. You want to hit the bullseye because that proves how good you are, right, marksman-wise. That bullseye, if you're right in the centre of the bullseye and you hit the bullseye, that means you did the perfect shot, right? No, everything was just perfect, right? And the word sin comes from missing the perfect shot. So that's what sin means, missing the perfect act of love, right? Now, every time we sin, whatever we do is in disharmony with God. Because God is always loving. He's always perfect in hitting the mark of love. Now, that means that every time we sin, we're destroying our relationship with God. Can you see that? Every time I sin, I'm destroying my relationship with God. I'm putting a crack or a resistance or a fissure, a break between me and God every time I sin. So the question then becomes, how often should I let my little sins go by? The answer to that question is obviously never. Yeah, never. So now that gets pretty confronting because at the beginning when I hear this, I'm going, but I've got lots of sins. Like I can see I do this and I do that and I do this and I do that. Like where do I start? Well, my answer to that is start at the biggest ones first. So biggest sins, for example, are things like, how do I bring up my child? That's where most of us make big mistakes, right, in terms of the way we bring up our children. We teach our children to become reliant on us rather than teaching our children to become self-reliant people, right? So what I see is that most children, even by the time they're teenagers, are reliant on mum and dad, highly reliant on mum and dad. By the time they're 5, they should be mostly self-reliant. Cooking for themselves, cleaning up after themselves, going to school themselves, not having to be told to clean up their house, their environment, all this stuff. They should be highly self-reliant, but they're not, because as most parents have addictions and they want the child to be dependent on them because it makes them feel like I'm a good mum or a good dad, right? And instead of becoming a self-reliant person, what I'm meeting, we run an organisation, Mary and I, well, not run it, we are members of an organisation called God's Way in Australia, which is like a non-profit, and we have volunteers come to work in the environmental projects. And when those volunteers come, many of them are 40-year-old men in particular, and they're children. They're like 5 years old. They can't look after themselves, clean up after themselves, can't do any work without being cheered on and rewarded for anything they do. And it's like, these are meant to be men and children. What's going on? It's because their mum and dad have made some major sins with them in the way they brought them up. So one of the questions was, well, if you have children, you've got great opportunity to actually get God's view on everything with your child and act on every single thing as soon as it comes up. It's a great opportunity to learn and progress and grow. And so, yeah, it's a great thing to bring up a child, because you'll learn a lot in the process, right? But if you don't deal with each sin, it's going to have an effect, not only for you, but now for your children. Yep. So the question is, well, what do I buy? What do I eat? What do I wear? What do I put on? How do I interact with people? Well, love governs everything. So I need to find out what is love. So I need to find the truth about it. What is the loving thing to do? And then I need to, out of love, do it. So I won't be going, but there's 5 things loving that I did today, but I just don't want to do this 6th one. I don't want to do this number 6. I want to leave that alone. Right? You won't approach your life like that. It'll be every single decision is an opportunity to love somewhere. That's how it will be. And you won't be frightened about making those changes because there's no fear in love either. So if I am frightened, it's an emotion, I've got to learn how to feel it, but I need to know my fear is causing me to be unloving. I need to deal with that. I need to somehow process through this fear so that it doesn't any longer control my acts of love anymore. Now, it's going to be challenging. And it's going to be because you can see, there's this I do, and there's that I do, and there's this I do, and and particularly at the beginning, because you start, and particularly at the beginning of your relationship with God, you start feeling like, there's so many things God's showing me that are wrong with my life. And it's like, and it can be sometimes overwhelming, like where we feel like, whoa, it's just too hard. But once you start addressing the issues of love as you go, you'll find your pride in yourself increase, your happiness with your own decisions increase. You'll find actually that you'll sort out individuals and your life in such a way that any relationships that are anti-love will dissipate and leave your life, and any relations that are in harmony with love, any relationships in harmony with love will stay in your life and grow to the result of your own happiness. That's what will happen. But for the majority of us, when we contemplate it from the beginning, we're going, it's not going to be happy. It's going to be bedlam. It's going to be destruction. It's going to, that's how we see it. It's not how it's going to be. But that is just one way we have a lack of faith, isn't it? One way to have a lack of faith is we think, if I've got to sort that issue out and I've got to sort this issue out and, that issue out and this issue out, my children are going to be upset with me and my husband's going to be upset with me and my mother's going to be upset with me if I deal with that and my dad will be upset with me with this and at work they'll be annoyed with me and, and we start looking at everything in a very, what really is what we're saying is that our relationship with all of those people is more important than our relationship with God. And for many of us, that is true. Our relationship with God is like, if we wanted to list our priorities, we go relationship with our husband or wife, relationship with our children, or for many people, that's even swapped around and their children are more important than their husband or wife. And then we go relationship with my mum and dad, that's more important. And then for some of us, relationship with mum and dad is more important than our husbands or wives, right? And then it's relationships with our workmates and colleagues and relationships. And where is our relationship with God? It's like, got to dig for it to find it. And when our priority system reverses, we go, our relationship with God, if it's the most important thing, that is going to make me the happiest if I live in harmony with that relationship. It's going to make me happier than Mary can make me, if I'm talking about my own life. And not only that, it's going to make me and Mary closer and happier together if we both do it. Right? It's going to make me happier than any of you can make me. Right? That relationship is going to also cause me to learn things that I've never understood and never would have the capacity to understand without God. It's going to help me have direction in my life and all of those things as well. It's going to help me change my life in harmony with love on a day-to-day basis, is what it's going to help me do. And it's going to help me get rid of all my sins. All of them. Yeah.
Can I just raise something in relation to that? Because I think the way you said that is very crucial, that the relationship with God will help me eliminate my sins. What I've noticed since we've been here in Belgium actually is that there's a lot of emphasis on removing the sins of society, the environmental impact that everyone's having, but there's a lot of people wanting, understandably, to correct the harm that's happened to the environment through recycling and through various other practices. And changes societally, but what I observe, especially from your example, Darlin, is that you allow your relationship with God to direct you in that process rather than freaking out about, oh my gosh, all these sins, I've just got to stop. I'm not saying you don't stop the sins, but to do it without connection to the conscience or God, you can go astray. I've seen a lot of people in Australia go astray because they just stop doing everything that they think is bad and they haven't dealt with any of the emotions. And sometimes they've stopped doing things that actually God didn't feel was bad, but they had interpreted it as bad. And so you've got to watch this, that you don't neglect the soul-based and God-based aspect of removing sin, because I notice that a lot of people try to. We learn about sin, we think, oh my gosh, I don't want to do that, and then we try to just alter our behaviour, and the soul condition hasn't changed. And also often people do go wrong with that. Yeah.
What I understand is to be at one with God. It's a gradually process.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. But in the first century, we talk about the Pentecost event, and the disciple were transformed suddenly. How do you explain this?
There's a common view that at Pentecost, which is what you're referring to, which was after my death, 40 days after my death, that a group of people got together, similar to here actually, around about 120 people though, rather than 60 or 70, and they got together and they prayed together and they received God's love. And there's a concept that it transformed their entire existence magically. That's the Bible view of it. It's not true. It's not what happened. What happened instead was that there were some of the people who were there who received love because it was a sincere moment. It also happened after my death, so they were quite emotional about my passing and dying, and they were desperate to have a connection with God, partially because of that. Many of them did receive love, but because of their individual feelings that they had towards God in that moment, which was encouraged by the group and also by a group of spirits. And then as a result of that, many of them had a transformational experience, and they started to honour God more than they honoured the rest of their life sins. So when you do that, you will find it's like the people around you will think you're a different person. They will think you're changed. And of course you have been. But it's only because your feeling inside has changed towards God and how important that is. That's why the change occurred. So don't think that this is going to be some magical mystery tour ride. Is that how it goes? Bee Gees, is it? Beatles, magical mystery tour. It's sort of like, it's not like that. It's going to require a pure desire on your part. God's not going to force love on you, and he's not going to force you into acting in harmony with it if you do receive it. That is a decision you are going to have to make for yourself. So part of the truth is that there is no magical solution here. This is why people want a Messiah, right? Because they want there to be a magical solution where somebody comes along and says, you don't have to do anything, I'll do it all for you. It's not going to work like that. You're going to have to do it yourself. And it's going to have to be driven by the sincerity that you have in relation to God. That's what will drive it. And without that sincerity, it's going to be a very difficult process. Not impossible, because there are people in the spirit world who have progressed to the 6th sphere of the spirit world by engaging a different process without God, but still purifying their love. They've had to do that. The law of compensation is the law that governs that. But what I'm recommending to you is to not do that. I'm recommending connect to God, connect to the love that God has, eventually have some of that love in you, and then you are going to have to make decisions. Once you receive some of God's love, you're going to have to make decisions in harmony with truth and love on your own day-to-day life. And when I say have to, you don't have to, because it's a decision, it's a choice. But if you want to continue to have a relationship with God, you're going to have to. Yeah? So the beauty of it is that this relationship, because of this quality, will result in infinite growth. If you don't do that, it'll be finite growth. So what we see when we're talking to groups of people is we see there's a lot of people who are concerned about the sins of the world and their own sins too, but because they don't involve God in them yet, they do try to work through some of their sins and work through and progress with regard to some of their sins. But the net result is there's going to be a finite level to which you can do that, beyond which you're not going to be able to progress. You need to receive God's love in order to progress beyond those points. Now, of course, it's not going to be need, is it? Because it's going to have to be a desire, not a need. Not it's like desperate need, it's a desire to do it, a passion for it. So what I'm trying to do today is encourage you to have a passion for God rather than just have some feelings for God occasionally. Yeah? A passion for God constantly is going to result in the best possible outcomes. Yeah? And that's what we're trying to encourage. So, France?
And I think the difference with it is then okay, then it's fun to go loving steps as well. It's like learning to walk.
Yep.
For a child. It's great. Even you may fall down a couple of times, and
Which
then
you
it's
do.
like, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
I can do this more loving and that.
Yeah, so the key is firstly to determine the truth, though, because, we need to first know what is loving. So sometimes when we're coming from a damaged environment, a damaged social environment, a damaged childhood environment, and so forth, we think things are loving that are not, so an example of that is the average mother on earth thinks that doing everything for her child is the most loving thing. That's an example of that, right? That is not true, because God doesn't do everything for you. He expects you to learn how to do things for yourself, right? So actually a loving mother or father would educate the child how to do things for themselves. That's what a loving parent would do. So a person who's damaged would go emotionally in some way or other, would go, oh, but I've got to, my child wants to go to sport, and my child wants to go here, and I've got to run them around and run them around, sacrifice myself while I'm doing it. I've got to do everything for them. And, they didn't have what I don't want them to have my life that I had. My life was too hard, too difficult. So I want them to have a smooth life where they don't have to make any decisions and any worries about anything. And while we're doing that, we're educating them to not make their own decisions, not make their own choices, not determine what is loving and what isn't. And so basically we're turning them into dumb adults, is what we're doing, who can't even look after themselves, and who are like 30 getting married and still thinking his wife's got to cook every meal for him as an act of love, right? So you can see that while I bring up my child that way, I've got problems, and those problems I would know about if I had my relationship with God. I would go, oh, look what I'm doing. See, when I was sort of in my younger years, if you want to call them that, my two sons, I've got two sons, and one of those, both of those sons, I thought, I never had anybody buy a car for me. I had to work and work and work before I bought my first car, and it was a dumpy old cruddy thing that broke down half the time, and I had to fix it every time as well, and I am not understanding that I had to learn how to do mechanics. I had to learn, a lot of good things from all of this. So I thought, I'll buy when I have the money, eventually if I work hard enough and everything, and I do developments and I, work really hard, I'll eventually get enough money to buy my son's car each, right? Not a new car, but pretty new car, 2 years old. Now, up until I was about 35, I never had a new car myself, and there I was buying them for my boys who were 18. What was I teaching them? See, I didn't consider what I was teaching them. I just thought, I was just feeling about myself and going, I don't want them to have to do what I did, so I'm going to make it easier for them. Not thinking that I was actually educating them, teaching them. And what was I teaching? I was teaching them to be dependent. And now when I look at it, there are still some effects. My oldest son now is 40, and my youngest son's 38, and there's still some effects they're living with based on what I taught them. And if I hadn't taught them that, they would be more self-sufficient individuals. So I look at it and I go, wow, like my sin, which was only to avoid my own feelings in the end, that's the only reason why I did it, has now made them more dependent, more unable to create. And I think, and now that I think about it, both of them have never, ever had the funds to, or the knowledge to fix a car. Both of them now don't have the knowledge to fix a car. And both of them also now have never, I don't think, ever bought a new one either, or even a fairly new second-hand one. Which by the time you're 40, you would think you probably would have had to do at some point. right? None of them had to do that. Now, I'm not saying you need a car to live, but what I'm saying is I taught them things that caused them to be dependent, and it's been damaging for their life. And if I was connected more to God at the time, I wouldn't have done it. Because I would have seen or foresaw the future results of my decision. And this is the beautiful thing about truth, is that you not only see in the moment what love would dictate, but you also see what it's going to lead to in the longer term future. What I see nowadays is many people bringing up children that are 3 or 4 or 5 years of age, and their future is already determined because of the damage that's been done by the parents. Their future is many of those 4 or 5 years old, when they're 25, it's going to require a very high level of self-awareness for them to change. Yeah. And really, if you think about it, if I've brought up my child in the right way, they should be really quite self-aware by 7 or 8 years of age and be able to change themselves from that point. But for the majority of us, we just do lots of damage there. So since this relationship exposes, so once I saw it, I'm going, I can't do that again. So there's many times afterwards where my sons have wanted me to and have been very angry with me about not doing it, but I've never bought them a car again. Mind you, I don't have the means now to buy them a car because we spend all of our money doing things like this. But if I did, I have the means, I still wouldn't. Right? Because I'd prefer to spend it on sharing truth than I would in helping my own sons avoid personal responsibility. Yeah. And this is where, once you connect with God, and this is, by the way, what God's trying to do with you. He's trying to help you see there's a whole heap of things that you're personally responsible for, and He's not going to ever take responsibility for them. Yeah? He wants you to. And see, a lot of us, when we think about a relationship with God, and historically this has been the case, we want it to somehow magically solve our issues and problems. What solves our issues and problems are understanding the truth and then acting lovingly. God wants you to get that. He wants you to see, when you know the truth, God wants to share it with you through the obturation of the conscience is the main mechanism God does that. He wants to share the truth with you, and then He is letting you make the decision to love. And if you make that decision, you will resolve every single issue you ever face in your future in a happy way. Not what you think is happy at the time, because I'm sure when you give up coffee, right at the beginning, it's not going to be a very happy experience. But it's the same when you give up smoking, it's not a happy experience. But the net result will be you'll be healthier, you'll be wiser, you'll feel more. And so therefore, it will result in your future happiness. The problem we have in this world is we're so used to instant gratification, we don't see growth as a process that results in a happy outcome. What we want is the instant gratification, and then we assess that as happy when it's not happiness. How many of us really feel happy? True happiness comes from progressing in these fundamental qualities. That's where happiness comes from. Charlotte?
I have a question about self-sacrifice. When is it loving and when is it not loving?
It's never loving.
Because I think earlier, Mary, you said it.
No, Jesus says it's self-sacrificing. Yeah. You said love is self-sacrificing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, what I meant by that is this.
For example, to save someone's life would be loving, wouldn't it?
There's things you may choose to do in your future that appear to be self-sacrificing to somebody else. So an example of that is Mary and I came back to earth. It appears to be a self-sacrifice. But what motivated it? How we felt for people on earth. Love is what motivated it. So when love is your motivation, nothing feels like a sacrifice. Nothing. But there are times when to other people it would appear like you sacrificed even your life, right, for the sake of theirs. So an example of that is, let's say somebody was torturing me, right, to tell the truth about Mary's whereabouts, and I knew they were going to harm Mary in the process. I wouldn't tell them. Now that might appear like a self-sacrificing act, but actually it's not. It's a loving act. Yep. So there are times when things you do may appear self-sacrificing, but if you've got the feeling that you're self-sacrificing, then it's not loving. Yep. Now I see this a lot with mothers with children and things like that, in families where the family sort of idea is, I've had children now, I've got to sacrifice my life for them. So mothers give up their pursuits, their joys, they love their different work that they enjoy doing and different things they enjoy doing, and they feel like they've got to give it up for the sake of their child. And then what happens, because this self-sacrificing emotion builds, the anger and resentment builds as well. So you end up feeling like, oh God, and this is why for many women in their 40s, they get very angry about even like ovulating is a anger. Stopping ovulation is an anger about having children. It gets so intense where we feel like we've given up so much of our life, we end up in this state where even our body starts responding to the rage we feel. Yeah? And yet, for many women, they're told, unless you're a mother, you haven't learnt anything about life. And, so you get this problem, this additional problem where you got, on one hand, you're being told, as a mother, you've got to sacrifice everything and do everything for your children. And then on the other hand, you're doing, if you don't do that, you're a bad mother. But you don't feel like doing it. So, and anybody in their right mind wouldn't feel like doing it. I'm saying, like, it's a realistic thing to feel like, what if you're having children, it should be a joy, not a sacrifice. Yeah. And what do you think the child feels when it's a sacrifice? Yeah, the child feels like, I'm not even wanted here, really. That's how the child's going to feel. So the whole self-sacrificing ideal is actually very, very damaged in terms of love. There are times when it might look like you're sacrificing self, but if it's driven by love, you won't feel like you're being self-sacrificing. So does that answer your question, Charlotte?
Yeah, it's still not clear how an intention can be loving, but it's not involving love of self.
Well, if you think about the expression of love, you've got lots of objects that you can love all at the same time, don't you? You can love yourself at the same time as you love your partner, at the same time as you love your child, at the same time as you love God. And these loves are not mutually exclusive. They are all able to be engaged at the same time. So, there are times when you might go, my child is sick, so I'm going to have to stay up with them. Yeah? Now that might appear to the outside as a sacrifice of self, But your love is driving you to stay up with your child while it's sick, to check on it and care for it. So that's not a sacrifice of self. It's a love-driven action. But if you had a feeling that, oh, my child has to go to basketball, netball, some sport, but I don't want to take it, right? Now, you can see love of self now probably should take priority, right? Yeah. Because if I love myself and I won't do for my child something I don't want to do, like caring for the child is something I wanted to do when it was sick, but when it comes to taking the, like, you know, a lot of parents do this every single days, 2 days, 3 days, they go sport here, sport there, music here. They think it's giving them opportunities, but what it's teaching them is a child can demand anything it wants at any time it wants and get it, right? Which is actually quite damaging. And so you would have to go, hang on a sec, have I got even the energy or the life or to even do this, right? And this is where your love of self, you can't sacrifice your love of child for the sake of yourself. You can love yourself and your child at the same time, but as soon as you sacrifice yourself for the sake of the child, now you're not loving both of you anymore from God's perspective. And it becomes quite clear if you think about the situations you get into.
Yeah, and actually, you know, these situations where, say you save someone's life and you die in the process, like all of these loves support each other. So actually, it's more a thing that your love within you motivates you in that moment to save the other person. So actually to not act in that moment would be a lack of love of the moral and spiritual development you have at that time. Does that make sense? So it always, the love is motivating it. Whenever there's a feeling of sacrifice, as Jesus said, we know we're not loving, and we need to examine if we're even loving the other people who might be demanding the sacrifice of us. Yeah. Because in my experience, they all support one another. My love of God, my love of my partner, my love of myself, my love of my children, they're not actually ever going to undermine each other. But in those extreme examples, my feeling is it would be a lack of love, of my own love, if you like, for that person not to act. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So again, when we're connected to God, Charlotte, everything becomes quite clear. Like you can actually feel, there I go again, thinking what I'm doing is a sacrifice, and I feel like it's a sacrifice. I shouldn't be doing it. I should be sitting down. Now, if it turns out it's not really a sacrifice and I feel it is, then I need to work through that, don't I? Mm-hmm. So that I sort myself out. But if it turns out, on the other hand, that not only do I feel it's a sacrifice, but it certainly is one, like where I'm giving beyond my capacity to give and beyond my desire to give to another, then I need to stop that action. You see it a lot with, people looking after sick parents and looking after children. You see it a lot in schools with teachers. A lot of things that are viewed as socially acceptable as sacrifice is actually harmful to both the person who's doing it and the persons who are receiving the results of it. Yep. But again, connection with God would... You can tell straight away, like it's instant, I'm out of line here. I can feel myself out of line here, There are times when I sort of have in the past, I've had this feeling like, I want to do something for Mary, but I'm out of line here, trying to do it, I don't, particularly when it comes to saving her from having feelings. That in the past, it's sort of like, I want to try, my injuries from my childhood would save mum from her feelings. And so I took that into relationships, and so trying to save Mary from having her feelings, and I go, I'm way out of line here. I've got to zip myself up, put myself in a straitjacket and stop doing that, And once you have a connection with God, you can feel how damaging those actions are to others as well as to yourself, but even to others. Because if I save Mary from her feelings, then she's not learning how to have her own feelings. And that's going to be damaging to her, right? So even in a relationship, it's far better that Mary has her feelings and I encourage her to have her feelings. But I've even got to be too careful about that. I don't know how far I go encouraging her. So I want her to have her feelings. I want her to have her feelings, like big cheer squad. And now I'm also doing the wrong thing, because if she needs a cheer squad to have her feelings, she's out of line. She needs to choose to have her feelings without needing a cheer squad, right? So I feel like I want a cheer squad, then there's straight jacket on that one too, and deal with why I feel that unloving thing. Work through that instead. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Is it possible that there can be a contradiction between like feeling close to God one day and love for God, and then the next, or like even just later that day, just simply like relaxing, you feel like I have a feeling where I need to, like if I stop praying suddenly I feel like maybe my prayer wasn't sincere, and
yeah, as you grow towards God, yes, that will certainly be the case, because if you think about your growth, this is really a question about growth. So let's look at the growth. You've got imagine these are spheres of condition, your condition in love, right? So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At one with God happens then, and then there's other spheres as well. Celestial heavens is where the other spheres are. Now, as you're growing, and this occurs even on earth, the earth is in this condition. This is where the hells are, in the first sphere, right? So that's called, in the spirit world, the hells are in the first sphere. The first sphere is made up of a very large area. The top of the first sphere is like, I suppose you could say it's very similar to what is called Summerland in some spiritual literature. It's where children generally go, the top of the first sphere, so they don't generally experience hell at all. And then underneath that, there's many layers of locations, right down into like the blackest of black, dark, really bad attitude locations, which are called the hells. Now, the earth itself is in that same condition, the first sphere condition. So imagine you're here in this environment, in this first sphere condition, living in this environment. Now, you learn about God, and you learn about having a relationship with God, God's wonderful qualities and nature, and then you start developing a desire. I want to have a relationship with that Creator. I want to have some kind of a relationship if that is possible, right? Now, we're here in this condition because the whole world around us is in the same condition, and we're here in this condition when we begin on earth. And so we're there in this condition that's really quite, there's problems with it. There's a lot of sin being committed. There's attitudes that we have that are out of harmony with love. There's inconsistencies we have inside of us, where with some people we act nice and other people we act badly, and there's all these problems we face. And every one of these problems is going to have to be addressed in this process of progressing until we get to the stage where we don't have any of those problems. So you could say this eighth sphere, right, which is called this beginning of the celestial kingdom, there is no sin in that place. None at all. In the seventh sphere, the major sins still being committed relate to relationship with God. And then in the sixth sphere, anything underneath that, there are a mixture of problems with God and problems with people. Problems with what we do. Now we're starting here. We're not going to get here straight away.
So it's possible to feel love for God and then, or like feel like God loves you, but then also later feel like
10 minutes later,
God is demanding.
Yeah.
Okay.
10 minutes later going into one of your addictions or your sins and feeling completely different. Definitely. Yep. And that will continue until you get rid of all your sins, right, as you progress. Now, the really good thing about progress is there's a point of no sin, right? But the world doesn't tell you that, and religion doesn't tell you that either. They tell you you are sinners for the rest of your existence. They tell you you were born bad, you be bad all your life, and you will always be bad. Bad people you are. That's what it tells you, right? That's religion encourages that view because it encourages sort of this idea that you can do bad things, but be sorry for them. Here we're saying, no, there's a time when you don't have to do bad things, when you'll no longer be driven to do them at all, right? That's what we call at one with God. You're at one with the way God loves. You're not in the same league as God, but you are in harmony with the way God loves, right? So we call that at one with God. So that no sin is called at one ment. And it's interesting that it got turned into atonement, right? But it's actually at one-ment. It's when you become at one with God, there is a point of no sin in the eighth sphere. And that's when you're sin-free. So everything you choose to do, by the way, in a place of being no sin, you still have an infinite thing you can choose to do. You got utmost freedom. When you're in sin, you are very limited in what you can do, right? Because the sin dictates what you do. Your sin is like what could you say? It's like a sort of almost like a subconscious guiding force on your choices. So it's not subconscious because you can recognize it, but it's like you feel like you got to do this. It's like when you get up in the morning, you feel like you need a cup of coffee, that kind of thing. You feel like you should do it, and you feel like it's good. And sin is like that. It will tell you that it's good, but it will also tell you that it's it feels good. Wants you to continue doing it, and in the process of continue doing it, it's going to keep you locked up and in chains to that thing. So there are many people who enter the spirit world who are addicted to coffee, and they are literally screaming for it. You understand? They have used it all of their life to suppress themselves and also get themselves G'd up and encouraged, and now they're desperate for it. So the very first thing they do generally is go to a person who loves coffee and just get them drink more, right? So they can share in that experience. And there are many alcoholics that are the same as that, where they're screaming for alcohol. You know, it's interesting when you go in the shops here, isn't it? Because one whole third of the supermarket is alcohol on the average. And you go into the shop. See, in Australia, we have what's called drive-throughs, which is like you don't get your alcohol in a shop. You drive into this garage thing and you ask them, give me this, give me that, and they just chuck it in your car for you. But all around the world, there's this huge emphasis on substances like alcohol, isn't there? And then you imagine you need this every day. You know, alcohol, suppressant, you need it to suppress usually issues of sadness. And so you're using alcohol to suppress those things. You enter the spirit world and there's no alcohol. What are you going to do? You're going to want some alcohol because you've had a whole life of needing it. So what do? You connect to a person on earth and you make him drink more so you can share in his experience. Because there is a process of being able to share the energy of the experience that occurs. So that's what you do. Now those people become so embroiled on what's happening on earth for years and years and years. I've seen some alcoholics stay on earth for 100 years after they die. Just trying to drink more and more and more, and trying to have the feelings go away. And the problem with this is that the addictions, the sins, lock you up so much that you can't grow. You can't move beyond that point. And this occurs on earth as well as in the spirit world, where you don't realize it, but many times our sins are causing us to stay in a place, and we finish up repeating like a Groundhog Day life. You know what I mean by that? A repeating life where every day we're doing the same thing, hoping for a different result and getting the same result. And every day we're hoping that one day our relationship will be better, but we keep having the same kind of relationships and the same problems. And every day we hope that if I do work harder, I'll have more money and more of this and more of that. And yet I work hard and I don't have that. I have less, in fact. And in fact, the world is almost governed for you to have less. And in fact, God's laws are governed in such a way that the more you act in addiction, the more restricted you will be. Right? That's how the law works. And so we don't realize that if we don't do this process of progression, what's going to end up happening is you're going to end up feeling restricted all the time, unhappy, restricted, disappointed with the accomplishments of your own life. And to be honest with you, after you pass, one of the most difficult things to face is not all the bad things you did, because many of times you know what they are. The most difficult thing to face is your disappointment. That you didn't take different actions when you had the opportunity to. And yet a lot of our actions are governed by the sin that we have and our inability to face up to truth and to then make a loving choice. Right? And that's what causes us frequently to make some very, very bad decisions for our future. Because remember, on earth, we are planning for our spiritual future. That's what we're doing. You've got, 70, 80 years here, and then who knows how many thousands there. So if you compare the time period, this period on earth is learn as much as you can, absorb as much as you can. Not about earth, but about the next life, because that's the one you're going to spend the most time in, right? So that's the one you want to learn the most about. But the average person on earth is going so focused on earth, so focused on my senses and satisfying my physical senses of taste, touch, hearing, senses, all these sensory apparatus we have in our body. We're so focused on satisfying them instantly that in the end we don't plan for our future. Yeah. So the whole goal here with this relationship with God is setting up your future. It's a practical thing to do to set up your future. Yep. You know, all of you who have said so far today that you don't have a lot of faith in God and don't have a lot of faith in the spirit world, well, the instant you pass, you'll have faith in the spirit world. Now, I would like you to have it earlier than that, but trust me, if you don't, you will have as soon as you pass. And then think of what would be your feelings. You go, I could have planned for it, and I know nothing about it. In Australia, I likened it to a group of people like I'm planning a trip. I want to come to Brussels. So what I do is nothing. I don't make any bookings. I don't make any accommodation arrangements. I don't book any flights. I don't take any actions to learn anything about Brussels culture or language or, weather or any of these other things. I do nothing. Am I ever going to get to Brussels? I'm not, am I?
Or if I get there, how am I going to cope?
And if I do accidentally get there, because it won't be from my own effort, then I won't know what to do either. And this is what life is in the spirit world for a lot of us. We haven't done much planning. We're not planning for our transition. You could also call it planning for your death, couldn't you? How often do you think of, it's really fun planning for my death? It's like, somebody tells you to make a will. It's really fun, isn't it? Yeah. Not really.
When I pass, will I remember, for instance, the teachings that I've received from you and Mary?
Yep.
That's going to help. I
Yes.
think. Yeah. Okay.
That's right. It would definitely help. Of course, it'll only help if I felt them. If I just thought about them, there'd be less help, won't they? But if I felt them, there'd be more help. Yep. So obviously, even just hearing something, it changes your life, even if you didn't feel about it. Because down the track, you'll be reminded of what you were told at some point. So having these discussions, even if you don't believe in them, and you walk away and say, I'm never going to see that Jesus character again, because I think he's a bit of a crazy man who believes in God for some reason. And even if that happens, down the track, you'll remember these conversations at some point. So it's good. Yeah. So Mary and I are not invested in you listening to us in this regard. We're just grateful that you could come along and listen. Yeah. Because it gives opportunities to share some truths that we know for certain are truths, but which we understand you might not believe are. Right? And so we're happy to share them with you. And who knows in the future, as a result, some of you will feel like, I want to do something about it now. Others of you will go, no, I'm not interested in that. And I want to, I don't even believe it's true. And so you may do something different. But either way, at some point, and particularly after you pass, some of these things will definitely come back and you'll feel them. You'll feel the reality of them. That's the beauty of getting taught truth, even if you don't necessarily accept it at the time. Yeah. All right, well, it's near 4 o'clock and we've only got a few minutes to sort of wrap up our day. And Mary and I have got to make sure we don't go too much past 4 o'clock because we've got another, 5 hours to talk to you tomorrow and then another 5 hours the next day. So what I would like to do is just summarise what we've discussed today and look at where we head a bit with it tomorrow. Should we do that? So what we've tried to do today is we've tried to help you see that God is real. And there's plenty of evidence that God is real. You need to just be open to the possibility that God is real. In fact, the approach I took in the first century was that it was easier to prove the existence of something than it is to prove the non-existence of something. Now that's if you think about it, a primary scientific principle. That it's easier to prove the existence of something than the non-existence of something. So what I attempted to do in the first century was to prove to myself the existence of God. Once I'd done that, it was a lot easier for me to have a desire to develop a potential relationship. I had to prove to myself that a relationship was even possible. Right? I had to get to the idea. See, the concept of God back in my day then was like, it was Yahweh, Jehovah. You might have heard it as, in terms of English translation, Yahweh is the sort of the Jewish sort of form of the word. So I viewed Yahweh or Jehovah as initially the whole society that I grew up in view Yahweh or Jehovah as a very obscure concept of there being this all-powerful creative being, but with very little influence on the individual. Does that make sense? It was sort of like this, it was very divorced from relationship, And so after I realized there was a God and he was real, my feeling was, I've got to have a relationship with that person. Because it's going to sort out a whole heap of things for me if I do. I'll be able to work out truth. I'll be able to work out what's real and what's not real. So it became very important for me to have that relationship. And what I'm suggesting is, if you can feel about these things and God's nature and qualities, and feel about the potential of God's existence at least, then at least you can start formulating in your own emotions the potential of having a relationship with her. Yeah? That relationship is going to help you determine this. Truth. Because truth on earth is like so mixed with a whole heap of error It's very hard on earth without some external force influencing you to work out what is true. Truth can be shared from God to you via a mechanism we'll talk a bit more about tomorrow, the mechanism of the human conscience. Truth can be shared with you directly from God. That truth then, now you have a decision about. The decision is, are you going to live in harmony with it? Or you could say, act in harmony with love upon that issue. Or are you just going to ignore it? You are allowed to make that decision. You're allowed to make that choice. Of course, as there is with any choice, there are consequences. The more unlovingly you act or choose to act, the unhappier you will be. And the more lovingly you choose to act, the more proud of yourself and happier you will be. That is a natural consequence of living in harmony with love. So, what I would like you to think about in preparation for tomorrow's discussion is, in my life, how do I currently determine what is true compared to talking to God about it? What do I currently do to work out what is true? And then when I do know what is right or wrong, do I act lovingly when I do it, when I work it out? Or do I just continue to act in the same way as I used to? Do I change, or do I continue to act in an unloving manner? So, what's going to determine when you hear truth as to whether you act lovingly or not is this very, very important quality: humility. And so tomorrow we need to have a chat about humility and what it means and how it feels like, and how does it feel to actually be humble inside of yourself. Because without that discussion about humility, can you see, you can hear the truth and do nothing about it. Like, you can completely dismiss it, right? But when you're humble, you go, there's the truth, and I need to do something about this truth. Like, I have a personal responsibility to do something about it. Yeah? And once you realize that, then, of course, the need to make loving decisions becomes much greater in your life. Yeah? So the question then becomes, am I humble? Really humble? Can I see truth, and then when I see it, do I act lovingly or do I act in fear? You know, when I see the truth and I see, there's a good thing to do here, do I go and do it, or do I go, no, I won't do that? There are going to be literally thousands of things in your life, if you choose to become at one with God in your future, from where you are now, there's literally going to be thousands of things in your life you're going to have to change. That will determine how fast you change them. So notice I said how fast you change them, not whether you change them. All of you are going to be forced to change at some point. You know why I know that? Because sooner or later, either all of you will end up here in the sixth sphere of the spirit world, or above here. That's where everybody who's ever lived ends up. You're going to end up there sooner or later, right? How humble you are will determine how quickly you end up there, in one place or the other. It makes sense to you? As you're going to end up there sooner or later, no matter what you believe. You can not even believe in God and you'll end up here sooner or later, right? You will end up there for certain. God's designed this universe in such a clever way that sooner or later you're going to want to progress. That's how it works. And you'll want to be less sinful, more sin-free. That's how it works. So you'll end up here sooner or later, even if no God in your life, you'll end up there sooner or later. And by the way, people there are like extremely happy to compare to anybody who's on earth. So that's where you end up as your minimum. Sooner or later, no matter how long it takes, the question is going to become, how long? Yeah? It's like humility will determine how long. The more humble you are, the shorter time it will be, you'll be happier sooner. The less humble you are, the longer it's going to be, you'll be happier later. It's how much you're going to have to experience in between that's going to determine your happiness. Right? Sooner or later, you will be happy, but it's how long you're going to wait for it. That's going to be the determining factor. And that is all about humility. That's what determines that. So we need to talk about humility and how we see the soul. So tomorrow our focus is going to be more about the human soul. What is it? How does it feel? What are the primary qualities and attributes of the soul? How do we have this relationship with God? And many of you asked about how do we do it practically? What does it feel like practically to have these experiences? What is going on? What do I do? How can I get to the stage where my goal is to find out the truth and live in harmony with love on the issue of truth? Where that is my primary focus in my entire life. Knowing that it's going to be to my benefit and to everyone around me, whoever comes in contact with me, their benefit too. That's the thing that we need to focus our attention on. So that's what we'll do tomorrow. That sound all right? Yep? Good. All right, now some of you would have had questions from today and other things like that. So what we're thinking of doing is that we will probably do this presentation tomorrow about the human soul and those things that I just mentioned. But we'll also want to give you some opportunities to maybe write down some questions or something like that. So maybe if you bring along a notepad where you can write a question, and if you have a question, we can bring it up. And Mary and I can sort of, during a break, we might just look at the different questions and work out which ones we feel are the most important to answer, and then try to answer them that way, because obviously we can't answer all of your questions, in the time we've got.
Is it worth, we're talking about the practical application, is it worth people overnight thinking about some practical situations in your life where you're like, what do I do? How do I be humble? How do I apply God's truth? And kind of have some personal reflection. Bring them tomorrow. There are notepads on the side table, so you could use them to write your questions. And we might get a box or something we can put them in. Or just
bring them up.
Or just bring them up here and put them on the chair or something, and then we can have a look. Because sometimes those practical examples are a great way to demonstrate all these things, aren't they? Yeah. Of course, as Mary mentioned at the beginning of today, we also would like to do some mediumship if we get the opportunity with you. So we're thinking about how we can incorporate that into these discussions. So that might be a Sunday thing where we do that kind of thing. And we'll have more of a loose discussion on Sunday where we try to sort of answer general questions and also do a bit of mediumship and other things like that. So that'll probably be Sunday that we'll do that. Does that make sense? Good-o. All right, well, thanks for your day. Thanks for your time today. Mary and I understand that committing some of your life to listen to Jesus and Mary is sometimes a difficult thing to choose to do. And so we do appreciate you doing that with your time. It gives us, we have a lot of joy, Mary and I, from sharing truth with you. And so we love the experience of having you here. And so we'd encourage you to come back tomorrow. If you don't want to, that's fine. If you don't want to, though, if you can just maybe remove themselves now from the... You might just need to send me an email, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So maybe it's all too hard because we haven't got enough time tonight.
Probably not. Yeah. No, I think because the event started, we can't open it to other people now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But if you don't want to come and you know someone who does, just tell them.
That's all good. Yeah. Usually Mary and I have quite a tight arrangement after these events. I've got to back up all of our sound, and there's a whole, you know, with the tech that we've got to do. So we, in the evenings while we're teaching, generally just go home, back up all of our sound, go to bed, and have dinner and go to bed. That's normally what we do. So we're not going to get a lot of time to socialise with you. And so the time to bring up questions and to raise issues is in the session, yeah? To feel comfortable enough to do that in the session. Now, what I would encourage is those of you who haven't done that but you do have questions, to not be shy tomorrow.
When you get to the 8th sphere, you're not going to care at all about the embarrassment of asking your question.
Yeah. Charlotte, you want to ask?
Are personal feedback questions okay as well, or just general questions relating to the topic?
If I feel there is sort of addictions in the personal feedback of questions, I will deal with the addictions rather than giving the feedback. So what I would like to see, if there is personal feedback questions, that you're actually thinking about, well, not just yourself, but also other people who have these problems. You know, what can be done from a position of love and truth to solve these problems, rather than sort of, I've got this little issue with my son and he's got this and that and this and that, and tell a whole long story, which can waste a lot of time as a group, and at the same time be very sort of selfishly motivated. So I'd prefer to see it more lovingly motivated, where you think about the group when you're doing those kind of things, but I'm not against them.
No.
Yeah.
Something that helps, like we want to talk to you about principles that you can apply to more than just one situation. Yeah. So that's what Jesus means about like making it more loving, is to think about, well, what are the principles involved in why I'm having this problem? And if you don't know, then just ask your question, and Jesus or I will probably focus on the principle with you, and that can help everyone.
So let's say it's like, I've got 2 sons and I'm having these issues with my sons. Those kind of questions are fine. But I'll bring it back to principles more than trying to, and help you go through the principle rather than trying to tell you what to do. That makes sense? Yeah. Yep. Oh, sorry.
I have one question not related to the topic, but I'm feeling like a heaviness and very difficult to stay here. Yeah. Can you say something about that?
Well, I haven't got time to say it now because we need to finish now. So we need to do any of those kind of things tomorrow. Yep.
It did get very heavy in here towards the end, though. I agree.
It did get quite heavy in here. Yep.
And it's mainly because people wanted a lot of their own addictions sometimes in the presentation, and wanted certain things that they weren't getting, and then they felt, oh.
I just want to say something to all of you, is that I know you don't believe it, for the most part, but I can feel everything that's going on for you guys. And the reason why I had the discussion with you today is because I feel that's sort of like a global solution to many of the problems you face. Even though you might not think it's as practical as you would like it to have been, it actually is more practical than you think for your life. So just bear that in mind, that when we do talk about subjects generally, nowadays in particular, we've already felt you as an audience, as a group, you know, like obviously there's individuals that are a bit different, but as a group we've felt, and these are the things we feel are the most important things to discuss with you at this time. Yep. So if you can just bear that in mind tomorrow, because there's a lot of tomorrow. Unless you come along in an open stance, tomorrow is going to be more challenging than today. Yeah? Because we're talking about you, right? And your sins. It's going to be challenging. So it's the key is to stay open to that process, you know? Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for your time today. And
love you guys.
Look forward to seeing you
nice
tomorrow.
To see you all and meet you.
We'll start again tomorrow at 11, same time.